Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK radio network. And I'm here tonight with my co-host, that bloke in America.
Well, since you forgot your name and my name, Irene Allen.
I just don't know whether I use that name or the author name or what name I use half the time.
We'll stick with Irene Allen and your co-host in America, Mark Johnson. Hey, everybody. How you doing?
That's it. Yeah, that bloke. Mark Johnson.
Oh, well, considering how late we are, people, listening to the podcast, you wouldn't know this, but we've had lots of technical problems trying to get this show off the ground tonight. I think we're dealing with a lot of outside forces.
I think we're dealing with a Nantanaka. Whatever it is.
Nantinak.
Nantinak.
Yes. Well,
one of them.
So we're going to get right into the show tonight because we are really excited to have several of the cast and crew of the Discovery Plus show Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. Now, we had our good friend Jeff Davis on a few months ago, who has appeared in a couple episodes of the show. But we're also, he was the historian in the show, but we're also joined by one of the show's producers, Brian Kniffel. He's an American television producer and director. Most recently known for his work on The Dead Files, Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch. God, that was a tongue twister. And Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. And we're also joined by one of the stars of the show, Ash Naderhoff, who everybody, if you've seen the show, Ash really stood out as a great character on the show. He's a survival enthusiast and instructor in the Alaskan bush. And so, gentlemen, everybody, thank you and welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Hiya, people. So we're here then. We've finally got it off.
Yep. So we have 5 of us on here tonight. We'll do our best not to talk over each other. I know Skype has a tendency of having a little bit of a delay. So, if we talk over you, we apologize. We'll do our best not to. But we're doing this show, especially at this point in time, because the show has really turned out to be a hit. It's picking up a lot of steam. And Brian, maybe you could talk a little bit about this, but I know that we're trying to push for a second season of the show. Do you know if that's still a possibility? And Brian, you're on mute.
Yeah, it is. It is. Season 2 is definitely a possibility. So, so the fans, I mean, you can check it out on the Facebook page. But people have reacted in a really positive way to the show. People are participating and engaging with one another. People are inquiring about trying to visit Portlock, which is another beast on its own. But Discovery Plus was very pleased with how the show performed, how enthusiastic the fans have been about it. So. The project itself is actually owned by Travel Channel, which is under the Discovery umbrella. So what they're going to do before they greenlight another season is run the show on linear cable on Travel Channel proper so that more people can see it and we can sort of expand the reach and get some more exposure that way.
Now, is the show...
Mark, sorry.
I'm sorry, Irene. Go ahead.
So we're actually, because you mentioned about... Brian being the producer of several shows. The one we're talking about tonight is Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And for the people in Europe that haven't got round to seeing it, not everybody's on Netflix over here, you see.
Well, it's not on Netflix. It's on Discovery Plus, and I'm not sure. Brian, can you speak to if it's airing over in Europe at all?
You know what? I can't say for sure. I mean, I know that there's a fair bit of Discovery programming available there, but I don't know specifically what regions it's available in Europe.
You might be able, Irene, to catch it. I mean, it's pay, but you might be able. Amazon might have some episodes you'd have to purchase, or there might be some ways around it. We could try to look looked so you can see some episodes of the show because, as I mentioned before,
Mark, sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but I'm losing you all the time. I'm going to have to go onto another computer. I'll tell you when I'm on it. Can you please, maybe? What's the show about? Explain what the show is about for the European listeners.
Okay, Irene, when you come back on, all you have to do is find this chat with all of us in and click on it and just rejoin the chat.
All right.
I shouldn't have to add you again, but go ahead and then I'll go ahead and explain. So, with Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, it aired earlier for the first time this year about residents of a small village up in Alaska, mostly Native Americans, who are sending out a team to investigate an old town that was a fishing town and had a cannery on site. But around 1949, 1950, the residents fled because they were terrorized by an entity called Nantinaq, which was a form of a Bigfoot. And supposedly several people died. In fact, many people died. And there was a whole history of that Jeff, when you were on the show and you were talking about the history spanning back hundreds of years, that people were experiencing the same thing. It wasn't just this one town.
Yes, absolutely. The historic record, please bear in mind, I can't exactly speak to Native American time period because, of course, that goes back centuries and centuries. But certainly in the written historic record, in the late 1700s, both Spanish expeditions and English expeditions actually touched down on the site of what we know as Portlock, Alaska, and they performed these possession ceremonies, and which is claiming the land and the people inside the land on behalf of their governments. And shortly after they performed these ceremonies, they themselves had misfortunes and people dying mysteriously.
Now, Brian, let me ask you, as the producer of the show, how did this show come about? How did you find out about Portlock, and how did it come about of getting the team to, with the elders' blessing of the town, to go in and start investigating whether or not the people could come back in and try to resettle the area? Because this is such a unique concept. I just wonder, how did it come from the pitch to getting on the screen?
Well, so by the time I came aboard, these wheels were sort of already in motion. The village of Nanwalek, where some of the cast lives now, and where Ash was living as well, was where the native people settled when they abandoned Portlock, and it's a really small village, about 300 people, if I'm not mistaken. But effectively, they've used up a lot of the space that they've got available to them. So they had been looking ahead to, what are we going to do as our population grows? How are we going to create economic opportunity and independence for the people of our village? And so they had already been considering revisiting Portlock as a place they might be able to expand and resettle, because they still have private ownership of those lands there. So by the time I came on, this was already a thought that was being discussed in the village. On the TV level, it just came down to, okay, if you guys are going to do this, we would like to go along for the ride. And so, with the blessing of a few of the village elders, and sort of their trust in Keith and Guy and Ash and DJ to go down there and sort of check it out on their behalf, we were basically granted permission to go do this with them. So we had to schedule it. TV takes a whole bunch of time, a bunch of additional pieces that need to be put in place. But we were able to sort of synchronize our schedules and kind of go along for the ride with this thing that they were already working on.
Now, the show, and again, if we are able to get a second season, I probably wouldn't be able to shoot till next year, I'm imagining, because now we're coming into June, and by the time it takes to put everything together, the weather window is going to be closing very quickly. So would you anticipate, if it was renewed, would they be able to shoot it all this year, or would we have to wait till next year?
I mean, it's definitely possible. It's there's all kinds of stuff that gets in the way, mostly weather, but there's definitely windows where we could get up there. We could be shooting both in Portlock and in Nanwalek and in Homer if necessary. So if they were to pull the trigger on a new season, we could get up there and start filming pretty quickly. I know Ash and Keith are dying to get back out there too. So, I think if we had the backing, we could do it.
Now, Ash, how did it feel when you were first asked to be a part of this project?
It felt like an incredible honor. I've spent a lot of time talking with the village elders, getting to know the histories and the stories and the lores. And I've experienced a lot of crazy things out in the woods in Nanwalek. Nanwalek's only about 20-25 miles as the crow flies from Portlock. So it's nothing like Portlock, but you still get some weird activity and stuff there. So when I got the phone call, I was a little bit scared, don't get me wrong, but just incredibly honored. And I have an adventure heart. Brian can contest. Whenever something needs done, explored, hiked, I'm always the first volunteer. I live for this stuff, so it was just the opportunity of a lifetime, and I jumped on board as quick as possible.
Well, the one thing with Alaska, I've never been. I've always wanted to go, but it does have that reputation. First, it's like the last untamed wilderness of the United States, and the fact that it also has this reputation with strange things happening. There's what they call the Alaskan Triangle. It's the Alaskan version of the Bermuda Triangle, where a lot of things have happened. I have a personal friend who we've interviewed, Bruce Pearson. He used to be one of my co-hosts on my old podcast, whose father had an encounter in the military with a possible pyramid being found up in the Alaskan wilderness. And they've done a few shows about that.
I've heard some really crazy stories about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to the point where he did a coast to coast interview, and then he started getting threatening phone calls to shut up. Then all of his Coast Guard records mysteriously disappeared. So he was being messed with there for a while. But yeah, a lot of strange things happening up there in Alaska. And of course, Bigfoot being one of the prime legends, I should say, that a lot of people have talked about seeing and encountering. Yeah, especially going from the whole Pacific Northwest, all the way from California, all the way straight up through British Columbia and into Alaska, has always been a very big hotspot for Bigfoot. But
I will tell you, they go much further down too. I believe that we had conversations with them, reports all the way down into Mexico and such.
Oh yeah, even like I said, I grew up in Los Angeles, and an hour away is Edwards Air Force Base, where they tested a lot of the aircraft, and the space shuttle landed. In fact, I was there when the first space shuttle landed. That was a fascinating adventure. But even Edwards Air Force Base, they have had Bigfoot experiences out there in the middle of the desert, in the Mojave Desert. So yeah, these creatures are seen all over the place. Now, with Alaska being such a large, untamed wilderness, there's lots of areas to hide, but this particular, I've followed Bigfoot for years, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a cryptozoologist. I'm not a Bigfoot expert. I'm fascinated with the subject, and rarely have I heard of anything really negative or about anything violent around Bigfoot stories, or they're very, very rare. Yet with this story and on the show, this one definitely seems to be violent to the point of killing people. So it's highly...
That was in episode 1 when Charlie was being interviewed. Charlie described it as a demon of the forest. Charlie's an elder I've spent countless hours talking with, and he's become like a second father to me. I trust Charlie with my life. Charlie's been a member of Namwalik and lived there his whole life. So he's heard stories, had experiences, talked with firsthand experiences from people from Portlock. And a lot of people say he's a shapeshifter and changes shape. And I know Brian can contest to this. He was right there with us the whole time in Portlock. Whenever we would hear stuff, we would hear big things. We would hear scary things. We would hear stuff that there's no way wasn't 3 to 10 feet from us. I mean, very close, coming right at us. We would turn on flashlights, turn right there, and there is nothing there. There's no disturbance in the snow. I mean, weird things that happened all the time. And one thing you're talking about, the vastness of Alaska, not a lot of people realize there's over 2,000 disappearances a year in Alaska, 2,000 missing people a year. And a lot of those are never found. It's a huge, vast area that has, well, serial killers. The wilderness is big. The animals are mean. The weather's brutal. There's a lot of dangers here in Alaska.
See, personally, I'd be more scared to death over a grizzly than I would a Bigfoot myself. Because the grizzlies will definitely eat you. And that's a question.
Around bears, you can really learn to judge bears. You can learn bear behavior. I mean, you can never completely trust a bear. All bears are different. There's mean bears. But you can learn an animal. You can learn how to deal with an animal. You see people in cages in zoos, you know, with tame animals. I've never seen anybody walk up and pet a Bigfoot.
No. Well, where I live in northern New Jersey, I'm in the forest area, the mountain, what we consider mountains. It's less than 1,000 feet high, but I have a wilderness preserve in my backyard. I get bears here all the time. In fact, this last week alone, I've had bears coming through my yard. Now, we just get the black bears, which are more docile critters. And we've only had a few incidents of people getting hurt by them. But yeah, the grizzlies, I've always heard when people go up to Alaska, they're always telling you, you know, be vigilant, keep your eye open, watch what you're doing. Don't just assume you walk around a corner. There could be something there.
Mark, do bears eat you?
It depends on the bear. Grizzlies?
I thought they just tore you to pieces.
No, grizzlies will eat you.
Will they?
Yep.
So they're meat eaters.
Line charge you first. If a black bear comes at you, you're pretty dead. You fight for your life. If a grizzly comes at you, you kind of just protect, let it see you're not a threat, and a lot of times it won't kill you. If a black bear comes at you, you pull out your knife, you go for the eyes, because it's going to be a fight.
Really?
I really thought they were not meat eaters.
Grizzly, well,
they do eat a lot of berries and bugs, especially this time of year. They move on to salmon. But if a bear feels threatened, it'll definitely kill you. And if it kills you, it's probably going to eat you.
Ooh.
Yeah, same with, I guess what's worse is polar bears, which is much farther north. But yeah, polar bears are very dangerous.
Polar bears are mean. You don't want to stumble upon a polar bear. You're done.
Now, in the time that you were out in Portlock, during the 40 days of filming, they didn't really show it in the show, but did you encounter any bears while you were out there?
I mean, Brian can contest this. I thought it was one of the weirdest things out there. We expected to go and see bears everywhere, signs of bear, just a few miles from there in Namwalik. I mean, people bear hunt all the time. We see bears. I got scratched by a baby bear this summer that was up a tree. I mean, like, I wasn't petting a baby bear in a tree. Don't do that. That would be stupid.
Especially if mummy's around.
Yeah, don't do that. That would be really dumb. But I did get scratched by a baby bear in a tree this summer. There's a lot of bear in the area. And we got out to Portlock. We saw zero. It was almost at the very end of the trip. I believe it was Kyle, DJ, and Keith took the boat out really early one morning and went way up to the head of the bay there, kind of by Windy. And they said they saw a bear there. And then Kyle found that little baby bear jaw. Other than that, we saw nothing. That was one of the reasons where we thought, man, maybe we are not like the top of the food chain here. Maybe there is a predator bigger. If something's scaring the bears off and eating the bears, I mean, what eats bears? I've never heard of anything that eats bears. The only bears were their carcasses.
Yeah. Is there an eerie silence out there?
I mean, yeah.
That's
no birds singing or anything like that? No birds, no rabbits running around, nothing?
almost nothing. So it wasn't just the lack of bears that was what sort of put our antennas up. There were no bears. There was no wildlife above the water, basically. Like, we saw almost nothing. There were bald eagles that basically disappeared once we arrived. Yeah. And other than that, it was eerily desolate in a place that is so untouched and sort of a perfect habitat for any number of animals you can think of. There was just nothing out there.
We saw Kyle walk down the beach and turned around, and a minute later turned back, and there was a dead otter behind him.
Yes, I saw
really
that.
Weird. But there was we didn't hear songbirds.
No.
Yeah, the dead otter. Like I said, I was been binging the season again in preparation for this show, and I saw the part with the dead otter, which it wasn't there a few minutes before, and it was a fresh kill.
What do you think of that, Brian? You were there when they found that, right?
Yeah, I was. I was just doing rounds with Kyle, and I think we had one of the camera guys with us, and we walked down the beach one way. The otter wasn't there, and then we came back, and then there's a dead otter laying there, and the tides go in and out pretty fast in Alaska, but not that fast. So, it was a bizarre situation where this thing that was not there just showed up freshly killed, and not in a zone that could have been freshly washed up. It's almost as though it appeared out of thin air.
Portlock is the place itself, Portlock. There's not much there in the way of structures, is there?
We were expecting to find a lot more than we did. I mean, we showed most of them on the show that we found.
Did you?
Well, the only real structure that was left was the one old cabin, which is funny. I actually went on Google Maps and found Portlock, and you could see the cabin in the satellite imagery, but everything else the buildings were gone. Just a lot of the old machinery from the cannery you could find scattered around.
No, the reason I'm saying that is because the last time Jeff was on, do you remember I picked up on something underground, like a cave, a mine or something like that? And that was the only thing I could see.
Oh, Ash and Brian, why don't you guys, I actually just watched that episode today again about that hole that Kyle found underground, and Ash, you went down under there.
To me, that could be, I mean, so many crazy, incredible, supernatural things happened out there. Of everything that happened, when I look back on my experience out there, that pit is the thing that sticks out in my mind. The second I walked up to that thing, when Kyle was showing us, my heart just stopped, my stomach just fell. I personally do not believe it was any sort of bathroom or outhouse or storage. I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that that's just not my personal take on it. I know everybody has their own personal view on it, but I was so excited to get down that thing. You can see kind of when they're putting the cameras down in there, that the sides of that thing are not very stable at all. It was definitely a risk, but I was not about to stay out of there. The guys were getting the mosquitoes were horrible digging around out there. It was just standing still watching me dig. So after a while, everybody's like, okay, you've done your thing. I'm like, guys, there's something to this. I know there is. Please, please, please. So the cast was getting tired of it. Production's like, Ash, how long can we sit here in an empty hole in the ground? Like, I know you believe this. So I pulled a nail out of the wall, and I showed the nail to Brian, and Brian's like, hey, jump back down there, man. So we jumped back in for the rest of the day, and we didn't really find much. Metal detectors were going off. We're pulling hair and bones and all kinds of stuff out, but we're looking for like plates or shoes. I mean, anything kind of man-made. And when we were going through the debris the next day, and we found that, which we later found out to be a Lion and Castle King Philip II, I believe it was. I mean, absolutely lost my mind. I mean, to find, I call it Spanish treasure. I mean, if you find something between 1556 and 1598 in the Alaskan bush in a hole in the ground, that just excites the crap out of me.
Yeah.
So there's your answer, Irene.
Well, it's just that's the only thing I could see when we were talking that time.
cold and wet and miserable, bitten by mosquitoes, completely down on my luck, admitting defeat, pulling out a coin from like 250 years before the first known expedition. I mean, it changed. I mean, that was one of the coolest things I've ever experienced in my life.
You still got it? Sorry. Have you still got it?
Guy has it. Guy took it back to the village.
I see. Okay,
Now,
Irene, they've got a pretty good collection in Nanwalek of artifacts and different sort of pieces of the history that have been uncovered and retrieved from Portlock. So they like to keep pretty good track of that, as it's their sort of their people's history.
Yeah.
So anything that was discovered there belongs to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anything. Like, I think that one of the guys wanted to take some sea glass back, and we're gonna ask first type thing. That's definitely their land. It's private, so we'd want to do our best to respect that completely.
Yeah, I understand that.
Now, Irene, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, just because of something we were talking about earlier. Now, Irene has not seen the show. Okay, I've told her the premise of the show, a little bit about it, but I've not told her specific details of the show. Irene, tell me again, and because I'd like Ash and
I can't remember
about the trees. Do you remember what you were saying about the trees?
The trees, the wood.
The wood, yes.
The wood.
There
was something about the wood that there was. Oh crumbs! They use wood. I don't want to say this on the radio, Mark.
Why not?
Because I don't want people knowing so much about me.
Well, it's just one little thing.
Bloody.
It's just one little thing.
All right, they use the wood as not only. It's difficult to say unless you explain about my invisible things out in the garden. I've seen,
which we'll tell them about in a little bit. But
okay, all right. They use the wood as a camouflage thing, so they can go invisible and stand against this, like a tree or a bush or something. You can't see it, but also there is something where they can come through it, like it's from dimension into another dimension type thing.
Now,
Capisce?
she was telling me this just before the show, and again, not having seen the show, and yet I just saw the episode again with Ron Moorhead when he came out, and what was he saying about the trees?
I remember asking Ron Moorhead specifically off a theory I was having if that creepy tree individual could be some sort of portal. That's something I believed from day one, without taking too much time. There's a weird funnel of energy right in that area. And Ron Moorhead actually said Bigfoot can go inside of trees. Well, he said that old native lore said that Bigfoot could go inside of trees and recharge in trees, almost like two different worlds. And I had never heard that before Ron said that.
Well, this is dimension and dimension I'm talking about.
I mean, Brian can contest. We saw so much stuff out there that just disappeared.
Well, one of the things, and Irene, if you want me to tell it, I can tell it. I can do the Crypt Notes version.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Yeah, because
you're quicker at telling it than me.
Well, Irene has had her own experiences. Believe it or not, there in the UK where she lives in Wales, they have what's known as the Trey Moor, which is known as the Welsh Bigfoot. And there were
that's if it is a Bigfoot. It's a dimensional creature. That's all I know.
Twice in her backyard, in her what they call the garden over there, she was out there one time and saw two figures that were cloaked and looked like, the Predator from the Predator movies. It's just a shimmering outline of two very large, almost Bigfoot shaped like creatures. And one of them approached her, and as she was standing there, and then when it got to a certain point, she raised her hand to say okay, that's close enough. And then
I actually said something beginning with F and then off.
F off. And it didn't turn around. It like stepped backwards. It backed up, and then it vanished, and both of them vanished. Then about 5 years later, she was in the backyard walking her dogs, and they were there again.
I wasn't walking the dogs. The dogs went out. I'll explain from here, Mark.
Go ahead.
The dogs went out for a wee, and they went down to the bottom of the garden. It's a big garden. They went down to the bottom of the garden, and I was standing at the back, one of the back doors on the patio, and this thing approached me again. But I knew it was the same one as I'd seen 5 years previous, but it had got even bigger. You know? It was the one that I told to F off 5 years previous, but it got even bigger. So I allowed it to come closer to me. And it was there for some time. I called and it was standing, it was like there shimmering in front of me. And I called to the dogs. The dogs come running up the garden. Now, I've got a massive patio. You know, it's got to be 40, 50 foot long, something like that. And as soon as they got to the other end of the patio, they wouldn't come to me. They just... Heckles went up. They started barking in my direction at me. They would not come across that patio to come to that door. And I know I received some sort of information from this thing, but I don't know what it is. But as soon as it disappeared, as soon as it went away again, the dogs come running in as if nothing had happened.
And see that story again.
Out there.
Say that again, Ash. I'm sorry.
We experienced very similar stuff out there. I mean, when we put the grid up in the fog.
Grid.
Ron Moorhead told us that how white light scared off Bigfoot. So we had a red grid we put out in the fog on a night, so that if anything was shimmering or invisible, if it walks through this grid, you'd be able to see it. And Brian, do you remember what episode that was in?
Mark, that's what I was telling you about, a fence.
Like you could see it, like.
Yeah, hang on, Irene.
Oh, I believe that was episode 7, if I'm not mistaken. But we used what's called a laser grid. And the idea is that even something invisible that passes in front of laser lights will disrupt those lasers. So we saw a ton of movement in this grid that would have otherwise been imperceptible to our eyes.
Does that match what we were talking about earlier, Irene?
I said I see lines of light. They're going in squares like a fence, and it's like you take it and you put it on a bush.
Yeah.
That's how I described it.
So it's a laser grid shining into the bushes.
Well, I didn't know that. I just see all these lights. Yes. Lines of lights going up, down, all over, you know?
Yep, that's a laser grid. Yeah, and I had forgotten about that, actually. So when you and I were talking about it, I forgot that they had put up the laser grid. So
that's what that was then.
Yeah. Fascinating.
You mentioned that it sounded like he gave you something. There's episode 5. There's a scene where it's about 20 minutes of me up in a tree stand and then coming out of it, standing up against this tree. All these crazy, weird energies pulsing through me is the night that changed my life forever. I haven't got a full night's sleep since that night. And it whispered in my ear. And I haven't watched episode 5 except the night it came out. I've rewatched the show a few times, but I've only been able to watch episode 5 one time until yesterday. I noticed something that the fans have been crazy incredible on the show. People are watching the show and picking it apart, which we knew people were going to pick it apart. We didn't know people were going to pick it apart to the level they've been picking it apart. Brian has spent, I don't know how many hundreds of hours watching the footage, putting it all together, making sure the storyline's all, coherent and everything. And people are pulling stuff out that he didn't see and we didn't see, just in the backgrounds and stuff. But when I was coming down the ladder, on that episode 5, and I was grabbing my backpack, there was a whisper in my ear a minute or two later, and people have been asking me about that whisper for a while. I didn't notice, but in episode 5, right when I get to the bottom of the ladder and I'm putting on my backpack, you can hear a tiny bit of the low end of the whisper. It's not a sound a human or an animal could make, and I never noticed it until yesterday. So
you couldn't understand what it whispered then?
I couldn't understand it. It wasn't in a sound any human or animal could ever make. And it was so close. It was touching the hairs on the back of my neck, and all my electrical gear, my flashlights, my batteries, my everything just went dying right at the same time. It was 21 minutes and 54 seconds into the 5th episode.
21:54. Okay, because
is that Mark? Is there any chance you can get that off?
In America.
Listen to it.
yeah, actually, because if I play, because I have a Discovery Plus on my laptop, if I play the episode and do a recording at the time, I can try to narrow it down, put it into my my audio software, and see if I can enhance it.
What I heard in the background definitely had more highs into it. In it, you can't hear the whole thing. I was shooting on a diary cam that day. I wasn't shooting. Wasn't hooked up for audio. I was just out in the woods by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that yesterday for the very first time. It kept me up last night. I'll tell you that.
Well, one of the things
from Mark, send that over to me, but the raw one.
Yeah, no, let me see what if I can pull it off. It'll have to be tomorrow. But so one of the things that I've always specialized in and that's fascinated me the most is, of course, audio recordings. And a lot of the investigations that I've done, audio, I think, is one of the more important types of evidence to get, because video, sure, you could catch something, but you're still not really sure what it is. But with audio, whether you're getting a noise, a grunt, a growl, or a voice, it's something that you can listen to and analyze, run through some filters, try to enhance it. We've even had on this show, we've interviewed people. In fact, Irene, it was our last show that we did for our couple of week break that we were in the middle of talking to a guest and another voice came through, and it wasn't anybody on the show. And that's happened a couple of different times. And I had to slow it down. I still can't understand what it's saying because it happened so fast, but slowing it down and enhancing it, you can definitely tell it was a male voice, which we think it was the person who may have died, but we're not sure that we were talking about that night. So when you were out in the woods and you had that voice happening, now, and here's something else too, which is what I'm really fascinated with the Port Luck area and what you're dealing with, is not only dealing with Nantinak, which is the Bigfoot, but a lot of other different energies that seem to be in the area. I've always felt like you're dealing with more than one type of phenomenon. And I've been investigating some locations here in the Northeast where it's the same type of a hotspot where multiple types of activity happen, and you're capturing voices. People are seeing, I wouldn't say apparitions of people, but like shadow people moving through the woods, activity happening that not exactly malevolent, but not exactly nice either. And it kind of reminds me, it goes back to, if you go back to the old world in Europe, you go look in England and Ireland, Celtic fairy lore, or even in the Middle East of Jinn, Icelandic elves, there's these otherworldly interdimensional types elemental types of beings that are neither good or bad. They could, just like human beings, be one or the other depending on who you're dealing with.
Could I join in?
Absolutely, Jeff.
Go on. Yeah.
Okay, because I as part of my archaeology background, of course, I studied Pacific Northwest native cultures, but also my master's was on the Vikings in Greenland, and so a lot of overlap. I agree, and in doing background for the show, fortunately. From the late 1800s through the 1940s and even 50s, there were anthropologists talking to native peoples along the coast from essentially Vancouver Island north into Alaska. And it is really interesting when they themselves, native people, discuss animals. They have a huge agreement with Western animal binomial system of animal nomenclature, the family, species, subspecies. but they include a whole bunch of critters that were not available for study as specimens in zoos, like Nantinak and a whole bunch of these other species. And the counter to that, Western scientists say, well, we need a species or an example. How many animals do we have that our Western science records as animals that you still don't have a skeleton of? But there are a lot of these beings or animals, like there were different species of these, what we call Sasquatch, or the big tall ones that everybody is pretty familiar with from Western lore or even modern sightings. But there were different types with different agendas. Some of them were considered much smaller, yet they were still kind of hairy men of the woods, but they had magical powers. They had these magic sticks. They would knock over trees with their sticks, and they had the ability to sing in weird voices, and they would hypnotize people and put them under their spell. So and this agrees a lot with Western European ancient traditions as well.
Do they sing in a very, very high pitch?
According to some of the anthropologists and their native informants, yes, it sounds sort of like bird song, but it's not. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
One thing we didn't really show a lot on the show that happened a lot out there, I remember on my diary cam talking about it for hours and hours and hours, was time moved different out there. It just felt like sometimes there were just whole time slips. There were, the beach and the tides as well as anyone. I mean, it's how we live our lives around here. I'd go on a hike, walk up in the woods for 30 minutes or an hour, come back, and the tides would be completely different. I mean, it takes, 5-6 hours for tides to move that much. We just had so much weird stuff going on out there that's, I don't know, I've never heard that before, but it's pretty interesting.
Would you consider that?
Sorry, Mal.
Well, let me ask this real quick, Irene. Would you consider that something like a time slip where everything seemed normal until you came back to the area and obviously a lot of time had passed? Or did anybody on the team ever experience what we would call missing time?
Well, yeah, I mean, you'd walk up in the woods I'd be up there for, like, say, a half hour, an hour doing whatever, come back and like 4 hours would be gone. Like, it just, I don't know, it's like time moved different. There was a time I got really sick where I'm sure you guys saw me, whoever saw the show, saw me puke once or twice or 300 times.
Yeah.
Got really sick right then. And it didn't actually show it in the show, which was one of the things we just didn't have time to show everything. I couldn't imagine trying to put 40 days of 4 cameras shooting 16 hours a day into 8 episodes. Oh man, Brian just did an incredible job there. But we couldn't show everything. When I was filming, or when I was cutting firewood in that scene right there, the sky, like on one side of the tree is normal, and on the other side of this tree, like turned in this like crazy rainbow thing, where like the whole sky like looked like a whole different world. And on camera, it just looked absolutely insane. I can't say the word. The guys laugh at me every time. I'm always on a podcast trying to say the word and I can't, so I'm gonna let Brian say it.
Chromatic aberration.
There it is. I've heard the word in a while. I can't say it worth anything. But it's crazy. You just look up and the sky on one side of a tree, the whole sky is just like a rainbow. And on the other side is completely normal. And then I got super sick right after that. And that's when I started puking like crazy and we just had to get out of the woods.
Yeah, I have two theories on that. I mean, you're dealing with, of course, different energies within the area. And, we're trained since birth to look at the physical world as our reality. And the truth is that there are multiple layers to our reality. And it's like, I always describe it as how we're able to see the light spectrum. We're only able to see this sliver of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which stretches out wide in both directions, yet we only see this much of it. That doesn't mean what we can't see doesn't exist. Same with reality. Whether you're dealing with interdimensional, multiple dimensions, overlapping dimensions, and energies that could cause the feeling sickness. But there's also there's the legends of Bigfoots using infrasound, which is sound at such a very low vibration. In fact, a lot of other animals use it. Lions use infrasound, for example. It's such a low vibration that it's difficult for us to pick up through hearing, but can have dramatic effects on the human body, namely feeling disoriented, getting sick. And it could be one of the, for lack of a better term, weapons or defense mechanisms that these creatures are using to try to push you out of the area.
That's something I never even knew existed. I don't watch a lot of TV, and I hadn't done a whole lot of like Bigfoot stuff in the past. I went out there as a survivalist. I thought if Bigfoot was anything as some sort of like big bear or some sort of leftover primate or some sort of undiscovered species, I did not expect the supernatural that we expected out there to happen. It was absolutely crazy the whole time. And I didn't know anything about infrasound until Ron Moorhead came out. Brian brought Ron out, and Ron shared a lot of insight that none of us had ever heard before. And talking through infrasound a little bit was definitely a hypothesis I think is very, very, very possible or even probable.
Yeah, and the fact that it's other animals that we do know of can use infrasound shows that, it's not just a theory. Other animals could use it, and possibly these Bigfoot creatures could. Now, even if Bigfoot is just an undiscovered hominid, a great ape, a human-like living in the forest, it could still use infrasound just like other animals could. But you're right, Ash, because there is this paranormal aspect to Bigfoot that, I'm friends with a lot of Bigfoot researchers, and most of them believe it's just a flesh and blood animal that hasn't been discovered yet. But I've interviewed too many people over the years who have had experiences with these creatures, and the supernatural elements to it, it just sounds so fantastic. That's why most of the mainstream Bigfoot community, they just don't want to hear it. It's like
I was coming down out of the tree stand. When I came out of the tree stand, I'd been up there for about 15 minutes. Had heard footsteps all around me. The tree was shaking at times. There's a chain dragging around. Scariest thing I've ever been through my entire life. I was so scared I was physically crying. I was shaking. I was there to show. I was there to communicate. I was there in peace. I was there to. I described it pretty good in the show. I just really wanted to go and say, we come in peace. We want to show you we're here in peace. And if you want to test me, test me. I didn't think that night was going to get anything as crazy as it did. But when I got out of that tree and got down onto the ground and started walking up and I had my back up against the creepy tree, that experience was scary. But at that point, I had 3 of them walking around me. I'm not saying Bigfoot for sure because I didn't see them. That moss out there is about a foot thick. When DJ's standing next to you, DJ is a big guy, it doesn't move. Whatever was walking around me was moving, where I could feel the whole ground around me moving. And it was almost like a scene from Jurassic Park. All the batteries started dying, my camera started dying, my flashlight started dying, and I said, F this, I'm out, I'm done. And right then, it was just getting light enough in the Alaska sky, and just getting into summertime a little bit. So you could just kind of see the tops of the trees and against the Alaskan sky. And these branches started moving a ways away from me, just like you'd see like some Bigfoot or some T-Rex coming through the trees in a movie at you. And I was petrified. I'm trying to turn my flashlight on. I'm freaking out. Nothing's working. My camera's about ready to die. And all these branches are like parting, coming right towards me and fast. I was freaking out, man. I was getting ready to fight. I thought I was like dead. It comes through the trees. It turns into a ball of light that floats around for a minute, about the size of a basketball, flashes like a flash and disappears. And I knew everything we heard in school, all the science books that we had learned wasn't going to do crap for us out there. What we were dealing with out there was supernatural, and there's no other way to say it.
Was that the most frightening experience that you actually
ever had in my life, period. I mean, oh my gosh, a bear coming at you, you know what you're dealing with. Something turning into a freaking ball of light and disappearing. How the hell do you deal with that? How do you process that? I mean, it just was the most incredible thing. Then when it whispered in my ear, that was no physical, human, animal. It was supernatural, and there's absolutely no way to describe it. And people say I'm crazy, but there's no other way to describe it. I feel like it took something from me that night. There was an energy that Polly talked on a little bit, and I've talked a little bit on the Facebook page that we run. That night, there was an energy pulsing. Polly had seen it. We had sent the drone up a few nights before when Noah was there, and when the big creature's coming at us, you can also see on their big funnel of energy pulsing like into that tree, and I could just feel it from my feet to my head, from my feet to head, just pulsing and pulsing and pulsing through me. And the only way to describe it is like being electrocuted, but the exact opposite, like the most low, dull. It was the most incredible, unreal feeling I've ever felt in my entire life.
This funnel of energy you're talking about, was it like a mist, like
Brian saw it a lot longer than I did. There was one day where we love Brian, we love the whole crew to death. They did an incredible job out there. They learned, they were splitting firewood. I mean, it took a lot to run the camp out there. But the first few nights, I mean, it takes a lot from going to, walking down the beach in LA to kind of going through the Alaskan bush woods at night. It's cumbersome. It's scary. Everybody's learning what they're doing still, kind of how the cameras are functioning out there and everything. So they have to turn their lights on a little bit and adjust stuff. So we just kind of said, do you mind if you guys stay at the beach tonight? We're going to kind of go in the woods and see what we can experience on our own. We'll take Rob, the audio guy, with us just because, so we have sound, But it just turned into one of the craziest freaking nights ever. And they sent up a thermal drone, and the thermal drone showed this funnel of energy pulsing into us. So they were getting a little bit worried, and then you can see the creature on the show coming towards us at a very, very, very fast pace. And that's when Brian calls get out now, it's too dangerous.
Oh, I wish I could see it.
It was, experience that'll be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the hope, Irene, is with the move, with the show moving to Travel Channel. That should be widely available internationally. Wherever Travel Channel is distributed overseas should have access to the show once we make that move. And that's happening sometime in the next month.
Let's hope so.
Definitely look for it. Well, you know what, Brian, I wanted to ask you, since you're from LA, actually I'm from LA too. So going up there with your crew and starting to shoot this show, you were right there along with Ash and Keith and DJ and the rest, and having these experiences. But what kind of, most of your stuff is happening off camera. Although this is the one thing I did like about the show is you guys did interact with the cast during the show at times. You guys would talk with each other. It wasn't just totally trying to stay in the background. But what other kinds of experiences did you and your crew have that didn't make the show that really impressed you?
So Ash mentioned, well, he couldn't say the word, but he was talking about chromatic aberration, which is it's an electronic phenomenon that affects camera equipment. When the camera is trying to replicate what it's seeing through the lens, it basically can't do that. And so colors will change on screen, or it'll create possibly a pulsing effect, stuff like that. We had that happen a number of times, and I know that everybody's first question is, could it be a malfunction in the equipment? But because Alaska is so difficult to get to logistically, I insisted that we went out there with all brand new equipment, top of the line stuff, so that if anything were going to go wrong, it would be less likely because the equipment didn't have a lot of mileage on it, or any in this case. So that was one thing that happened a ton and didn't make the final cuts of the show. But it's something we hope to investigate further in a season 2. In addition to that, we heard all kinds of noises, these super deep guttural growls that didn't sound like any animal that I'm aware of. That happened all the time. The thing that happened when Ron Moorhead brought out that big speaker, where he was just playing Bigfoot sounds that he had recorded in California 40 years ago. the forest just came alive, and we heard every sound you can imagine. Sounds we had not yet heard after, I don't even know how many days we had been out there at that point. I think 3 weeks or something like that. Noises that you wouldn't expect to hear in Alaska in the middle of the night. So we were hearing sounds that sounded like tropical birds, almost like parrots, which was bizarre. Another time when we were out by what the guys called the spooky tree at night, I had what felt to me like a paranormal experience, where it just felt like something very, very cold just squeezed me very, very temporarily, almost like something gave me a hug and then moved on. And that had never happened to me before, even though I had been in haunted houses hundreds of times through my work on the Dead Files. So there was just something new every day. I can honestly say that I've never been to a place with an energy like Portlock. Like, there's definitely something going on there.
Now, Ash, you'd mentioned the globe of light, and I have another story to tell you. But before I do, and Brian, you can chime in on this too. How often, if at all, did anybody else happen to see balls of light, whether pinpoint, golf ball size, or as you mentioned, soccer ball size?
Yeah, I wish we could have covered that a whole lot more. It's all the time. I mean, there's a scene. You remember where that is, Brian? Was that episode 5 with Keith and Kyle on the beach?
I'm not totally sure. There are 2 instances of it that I'm aware of. One was during the night hike when Noah was there. Our camera actually caught it, and Noah thought it was eye shine. But when you look at the footage of it, it just looks like an orb moving back and forth in the trees. So that was one time where we actually caught it with our cameras. The second time, I don't think that our footage was that good of it, but Kyle spotted it in the trees the night that we did the speaker experiment with Ron Moorhead. And we're just looking up at the trees afterwards, after that forest came alive. And sure enough, you could see probably a volleyball-sized ball of light just moving around, probably 6 feet or so behind the actual tree line. But it was moving back and forth behind the trees. And then 1 second it was there, and the next it vanished.
Then I believe it's in episode 5. Kyle and Keith are on the beach talking, and there's a ball of light, an orb of light flashing behind them. And this is something we never caught. A fan actually pointed this out to us. And after a little bit, you just see it just disappear. It's there, and then it's gone. I had the experience when my battery died in the forest when it flashed. And then I was talking with Keith, and Keith said when they were out filming one night, he saw a ball of light twice. I believe it was white the first time. We called it the Matterhorn, that sharp mountain that went behind the camp. And then another time, he said when it came back around, I believe he said it was red, or it had a red light with it also. And he watched it for a little bit, and it disappeared.
Now, the reason I bring it up is because that is actually reported a lot in Bigfoot encounters and people investigating. I've mentioned this story several times in the past on the show. There's a friend of mine in Ohio. He runs the Ohio Bigfoot group, and he saw one once 25 years ago. He's been out looking for it ever since. And about 10 years ago, I was out in a Walmart with my wife shopping at about 7:00 at night. My phone rings. It's him. Now, he's one of these researchers that thinks Bigfoot is nothing more than an undiscovered ape. He thinks it's just an animal. Doesn't believe in the paranormal at all. Yet he called me up. He was still in the middle of the woods, scared to death. He was walking along, and all of a sudden, this large ball of light floats out of the woods, floats right up to him, and hovers in front of his face. And so I had to ask him questions, because I had to pull some information out of him, because he was not like he was reluctant to talk about it, but because he was on overload. And I asked him, I go, well, how did you feel when that happened? And he goes, you know what? I felt very peaceful when it was just hovering there. He didn't think anything. It was peaceful. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then he suddenly got the idea to reach for his cell phone to try to take a picture of it. The second he did that, poof, it was gone. And it wasn't until that point where he got scared. So he gets on the phone and calls me. He's standing out because he knows I'm the paranormal guy. He's standing out in the middle of the woods, still shaking in his boots, telling me about what he saw. And then he records, he has his own YouTube channel, Ohio Bigfoot Hunter. And he records his forays out searching for Bigfoot. And most of it's pretty mundane. Nothing really much happens. But there was a short period of time where he was in an area where he was capturing these balls of light. And one time he didn't realize he captured it because he had the camera pointed towards him on night vision talking. And behind him, you see this ball of light moving through the trees. And what impressed me the most was you could tell it wasn't a bug or anything, because it would move in front of one tree, then behind another. And so it was weaving in and out of the trees. And you could start to tell that it was about the size of almost a basketball or something, maybe a little bit smaller, but still a very large size ball of light. That was about 40, 50 yards behind him, moving through the trees. So it's a very common occurrence in these areas, not only with Bigfoot, but areas of high strangeness as well. There's this other show that's on History Channel. I don't know if you guys have seen it, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which they're dealing with this ranch in Utah that has all this wild paranormal activity. And one of the things that they keep capturing are these balls of light. They'll see stuff in the sky, but they'll see stuff also along the ground just appearing in the woods. So it seems to be an attribute to these areas that have what I call, real elements of high strangeness. Did I lose everybody here?
Yeah, no, I'm here, Mark. And one of our producers that was out there with us, a guy by the name of Spencer Schwab, he actually was a producer on the most recent season of Skinwalker Ranch, and he noted the similarities between the two as well. And I myself spent a lot of time in that part of Utah doing the Mystery of Blind Frog Ranch, which is 15 miles from Skinwalker, and saw a lot of the same stuff there.
You were going to say something, Ash?
Oh, sorry, my dog. I didn't realize I was on mute.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I've even seen there was a couple of older TV shows. There's this area in Romania called the Hayabachu Forest, which is supposed to be very haunted and have UFO activity and all this high strangeness. And a couple of different TV shows have gone out there, and there's this big clearing in the middle of the forest where no trees grow at all. They don't know why. And people who've investigated there, the camera crews there, kept picking up these balls of light shining in the trees. And they'd follow them, and sometimes they turned from like orange to red to green, and you could never get close enough to them. They'd move through the trees, and if you got close enough, they'd wink out, and they'd have all sorts of other phenomenon happening. Something that I would suggest for if you do get the second season, and I'll be honest with you, since I'm binge watching it this season again, because there is stuff I forgot. I don't know if you guys ever experimented with this, is to bring along with you, you've got the audio recorders, which is great, and the cameras are great and whatever. Trying to bring some instrumentation like a tri-field EMF meter. Because when you're in these areas and you're starting to feel this energy, to see, the tri-field meter, the good old ones, which is the needle, they're the best of the best in terms of picking up electromagnetic fields from all three directions on 3 axes. And when you're feeling this energy, it should be throwing off an electromagnetic field that can be measured, and you guys could capture that on camera, showing that when something's happening, are you getting the higher EMF? If everything goes away, does it go back down to 0? Now, it doesn't happen every time. It's not clockwork, but there have been many investigations where when we start to encounter activity, we will encounter higher levels of electromagnetic fields. And it can also act like a barometer, too, to tell you when you're in an area that, hey, things are starting to happen around you.
I know hopefully if we do get a season 2, we can try a lot more
Yeah, and I know the whole main part of the show is not just to capture paranormal activity. I mean, the town is looking to try to resettle that village. And I'm just curious, Ash, what was the reaction to the village and the elders when you guys came back from the expedition, and especially after the television show? What was the townspeople's opinion of what they saw?
Oh, I'd hate to put words in their mouths. I know a lot of people are really proud of what we accomplished out there, but you definitely have to ask one of the native guys that question.
Okay. All right. Because, is that something that they still talk about, wanting to try to resettle out there?
I would hate to give away anything for season 2. That's just something that, I'd ask one of them on that one. I don't want to give away too much. I know we're talking some season 2 stuff right there, so I need to be careful on that one.
Okay. Well, I figure if there is a season 2, that would have to be part of the element of it. But
it would, which is why you just can't talk a whole lot on
Understood. Absolutely understand. Jeff, I know we didn't get a chance to talk with you much on this, and I know you were there for a couple of episodes as a historian. Before you got called out there, how much work did you have to do to really pull up all that information about the past expeditions going back hundreds of years?
It's always interesting when I get an email or a phone call from Brian Kniffel saying, "Hey, Jeff, we got something happening," because the research questions take me in all different directions. And of course, Brian does his work too, and has other people doing historic research at the same time. And so it's interesting trying to work a synthesis of what I find and what Brian has found. And it was quite a while. God bless Google free books, because the journeys of Portlock were published in Portlock's lifetime, and they're now scanned and available. Similarly, translations from the Spanish expeditions or other scholars' work on them. And so there's a lot of research on that in newspaper articles. Brian's researcher found some, I found some, just trying to pull all this together. And I'm lucky in that my public library, in their reference section, has a whole bunch of anthropology and Bigfoot related articles. And so I was studying up for several weeks off and on between some of my work assignments. And it was a pleasure being able to actually meet Ash and Keith and talk to them. And to anyone listening to this podcast, they are, so to speak, as advertised. Ash and Keith are very regular people. They're not actors. They're not putting stuff on. My conversations with them were very frank, very real. There was a lot of cutting going on because Ash, I think the first day we met, we talked for like 8 hours on and off camera. Or not. Can you still hear me, Mark?
Yeah, we hear you. Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. If I could, I'd like to add to people, when you watch the show, Brian did a great job of finding local people to share their stories and the legends and their own personal experiences. And so those I found very interesting. And I also have some ideas to explain some of what happened in season 1 and possible explanations that are part of the historic record or part of the anthropological recordings of the native people. And some of them, if it's not magical, it's not supernatural, even if some of these possibilities are just ordinary, there's still some very spectacular history involved in that part of the world.
Let me ask, with both Ash and Brian, you being there, you've heard all the stories. You heard the stories from the elders. You heard what Jeff told you about prior expeditions. And in the time you were there, you had some frightening experiences. But would you say that what you were dealing with was evil? Or would you say that, you know, because it seemed like at times it seemed to try to communicate with you. Other times it seemed like it was trying to scare you to get you out of the area. Now, that's assuming if we're talking about one thing. Maybe there's multiple different things happening there, and each has its own agenda. So, I mean, but did you really feel that what you were dealing with was evil?
I want to hear what Ash says before I give my answer.
Man, I was sitting here waiting for Brian being all quiet. That's a tough one. That night where I went out on season 5 there, I went out because everyone had said it was evil. All the stories I've heard were evil. Everything that we had experienced up to that point was curious and testing, but what I experienced that night in season 5, I believe if it wanted to kill me, it could have. I believe if it wanted to harm me, it could have. But I also believe it told me kind of we had pushed our luck a lot to get out. And we haven't talked about the night that it attacked our tent yet either. We haven't talked about the burning icon. And then just the native members.
Remind me,
burning icon.
Yeah, remind me. I remember the rocks coming down on the tent, which is again a typical Bigfoot activity. But I forget.
Were they rocks or stones?
Big
stone. Rocks, basketball size, bigger than basketball size rocks.
Tell us a little bit more about the icon. What was the situation around that? Because I don't quite remember that one.
The icon was seen there. The whole experience is one of the more touchy for me. Because I've been a Christian my whole life, been a Christian for a long time. And when we saw that, when Guy put that icon up, that was a kind of a big moment for all of us. We really felt the protection, really felt kind of like keeping us safe or making a stand there. And when I was out in the woods, I don't remember if it was the 2 nights later. I mean, it wasn't very much later at all, just a couple nights later. And I was pretty close to the obelisk and I smelled smoke and it looked like a little bit of flame. So I went running over there and the icon was on the ground burning. I mean, it was burning ash on the ground, on film, on camera, on TV. To me, that's an act of hostility. I don't know. I said it the day after. I went and had to kind of wake up the producers that night and just be like, hey, here's what happened. Here's the footage of it. The guys are going to leave as soon as they see it. As soon as Keith, DJ, Guy, as soon as they see this, like they're gone. This means a lot to them. This is their faith. This is how they've always been grown up, to believe. They are very, very passionate in their faith. Russian Orthodox, and they just we knew that the show was over at that point, so we were just trying to figure out how to break it to them. And when we went back the next day, it was just there like normal, and it just was one of the craziest, most supernatural experiences out there, like hands down. So it's something to do that, to attack the tent. It to me, I'm so 50-50 on it. I believe it. I'm going to say something really controversial. If no one told me we were out there to see Bigfoot, I don't know if I would have came back and said that we saw Bigfoot. I would compare it a little bit more to Skinwalker Ranch. As you mentioned earlier, we experienced a lot of crazy supernatural things out there. And I believe it was in episode 7, we caught something on camera, which there's no way you can say it doesn't look like a Bigfoot. We know it's not cast and crew. We know it wasn't one of us, and it looks like we caught Bigfoot on film. I mean, there's no way you can say that, but I don't know if it's something replicating a Bigfoot. I don't know if there's more than just Bigfoot, if there's a portal and Bigfoot and other stuff coming through there. I couldn't tell you. I could tell you at times it felt like we were being tested, and at times it felt like it was evil as heck and we just wanted us out. There were times where when we left the woods, it was because seriously we felt that we were in fear for our lives.
You mentioned earlier about shapeshifters and about people thinking whether Bigfoot being a shapeshifter or maybe these elemental type of beings can shapeshift. People think that, Bigfoot can change from being a Bigfoot to looking like a bear to turning into a ball of light. Again, all of these really fantastic elements that stretch our concept of reality. And I agree with you when, it's hard to say you're dealing with a Bigfoot. You could be dealing with a Bigfoot and some other things. The rock throwing at your tent reminds me, there was an old account going back to, I believe it was the 1920s. You might have heard of it. Jeff, I know you've probably heard of it. That happened in Oregon in a location known as Ape Canyon, where there were these miners that saw a Bigfoot and supposedly shot it and killed it, and it fell off into the canyon below, hence it got the name Ape Canyon. That night, while they were in the cabin, they were attacked by several Bigfoot creatures that spent all night long throwing rocks down onto the cabin, trying to break down the door. They were shooting through the doors. It was a standoff that lasted until morning, until they got out of there. And then when they left, they said, you see these big boulders all over the place. So when it started happening to your tent, it started reminding me of that old story. And
there were 2 times when we were out there where we kind of, I'm going to say, not had weapons drawn, but had our hands on our weapons and were ready to fight. And that was one of the 2 nights. I believe Brian talked a little bit earlier on how production had to set up a little bit of a separate tent next to us. There's no way to sleep and have all the cameras charging and, people looking at footage and doing all that stuff. So a few feet away from our primary tent, we had to set up a production tent. And some of the guys were over there, and we were just going to bed in our tent when the rocks started hitting us. And I wish we could have had time to show that whole scene on there. I remember getting on the radio and kind of when the first rocks were hitting us, we're like, hey, guys, stop it. That's not funny. And they're like, what are you talking about? We're like, stop it. Like, that's not us. And then the rocks started getting bigger and we could hear some sounds of wood knocks and we knew that something wasn't right. So we were kind of on the radio saying, hey, guys, get back. That's not cool. And they're like, it's not us. And that's when the big rock started coming in. And when that big rock came in and the tent went down, at that point, I remember getting on the radio, being like, hey, you guys, we need to clear this. We need to protect ourselves. Stay there, stay down, like make sure this isn't some sort of stupid joke type thing. They're like, do what you need to do to protect yourself. Like that was one of the 2 moments. So the other time was when something was coming when on the thermal drone from the Boniatis on the beach. We knew that it was right around the corner and going to be there in seconds. But coming out of the tent after just being attacked, after hearing all the sounds and the growls and the hollers and the knocks, I mean, that's a startling feeling. That's scary as crap. And then you see the size of those rocks. Those things were massive. I know Bigfoot has good aim. People talk about rock throwing, how it's always next to them and doesn't hit them. None of the rocks hit us. I don't know if Bigfoot can see through canvas or not. How one of us didn't die that night, that was a complete miracle. I went over with Brian a few minutes after kind of everybody calmed down and kind of stuff. And we tried to pick the rocks up. And I mean, I remember like kind of cutting my hand a little bit on the barnacles of it. And I don't know if you could throw them 2 or 3 feet, no more. How far was the beach there, Brian? I mean, it was like...
Oh, like on the lowest tide, it was 50 yards. And on the highest tide, it was probably like 20 yards.
Were the rocks coming from the woods or from the beach?
They were coming from the beach, and the beach and the rocks were still wet. It was as though they had just come straight out of the water. Some of them.
Wow.
Covered in barnacles, like huge, massive, sharp things.
Gosh,
Wow.
It's a pity you didn't have a camera running outside.
We didn't. We had some trail cams, but anytime anything supernatural happened with a trail cam, we covered it pretty well in the show. It would just turn into a rainbow and be done. That fried the camera every time. So we did end up putting cameras up right then. I think it was, do you remember who it was on there? I know it was me, and I believe it was guy who grabbed cameras. And most of the footage you see of that is just the diary cams that Guy and I shot. Like I said, production, they were told to kind of lay down type thing. We had to like clear the area. So they were just kind of like hunkered down in their tent when we were like clearing all that.
Now, were the trail cams themselves actually fried, as in inoperative, or was it the batteries that were fried?
Oh, they were operative again. Brian's much better with technology, so I'll let him kind of cover that one. But I mean,
Yeah, we dealt with it both ways. So there were certain times where we'd put fresh batteries and fresh cameras out, and they'd be completely dead. The batteries would be completely dead the next morning. There were other times where they didn't die, and it was just every file that was recorded, every time the camera was triggered, those files were corrupted in some way. And again, we went out there with all brand new equipment. This isn't stuff that's just, old stuff breaking down. This is brand new stuff built for the elements we were shooting in that was malfunctioning inexplicably.
Then you'd take the camera, you'd change, take the memory card, you'd clear it, go back to camp, whatever, test it for a day, a week, a month, it would work fine, go put it back out, and same thing would happen again.
One of the final things, we are coming up towards the end here. One of the final things I wanted to ask you is, several times in the show, people were brought in to help and bring in different techniques, different ideas. One was the medium in episode 3. And then later on, the paranormal team. Well, you had Ron Moorhead also came in too, but the paranormal team. And just, only based on what I could see on the show. I mean, I have my opinion on both the medium and the paranormal team, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on how you felt about when they came out and what they were. Do you felt like that they knew what they were doing, or that they helped at all? What were your thoughts on that?
I'd like to take first crack at this one, if you don't mind, Ash. Everybody that came out to help definitely contributed in their own way. There were some things that, and I think that a lot of mediums can understand this. There are some things that Polly, the first medium who came out, picked up on that we were not aware of. And so a lot of those dots didn't connect for us in that moment. But as that sort of greater investigation went on, as we spent more time out there, as we collected more stories from some of the village elders, a lot of the stuff that Polly saw in that moment was true and was informative about, putting this greater puzzle together. So in the moment, I don't think we were able to tell just how helpful she was being, but she truly was. And obviously she paid a little bit of a price for it. She got sick and she got sort of chased out of there. Now, in the case of, obviously, Jeff's help was immeasurable, just helping to understand that these stories, these records had been in existence long before, any of these stories sort of made it into the public consciousness, even predating some of the elders from Nanwalek. Then obviously Ron Moorhead was super informative. Tiffany, the sensitive, and Liam, who I believe is the only active demonologist in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken. All of those people were super helpful. I don't think that the problem is close to being solved, but all of them helped us have a better understanding of what's happening there and gave us an idea of what avenues we should pursue if we're lucky enough to keep trying to unearth the secrets of that place.
Well, I'm certainly hoping that you guys do get that opportunity because, again, it's a very intriguing show. It shows a part of the country that you don't see that often. They don't really show a lot coming from Alaska, except for a couple of niche shows. And in between Ash, you and Keith and Kyle, DJ, everybody, just the real people being out there and trying to understand this. And you all took time out of your lives, your personal lives, to go and be a part of this television show and get involved and have experiences that you never had any idea you were going to be experiencing. did you have any idea based on from the stories you heard from the elders that you would encounter anything that paranormal, or what was your expectations when you went out there? Ash, can you hear me?
Sorry. I had trouble with my mute button there. I said it in the show a little bit, and I said it to Polly. When Polly first came in, I was talking to her for a little bit. She did not know where she was coming. She knew she was getting off a plane in Homer. She's from Arizona, if I remember right. And then she was getting on a helicopter, and the helicopter was dropping her off somewhere really remote in the bush with a camera crew and a couple crazy bush dudes. She kind of went into as blind as possible to be open as possible. So when Polly kind of sat down, and we had producers there making sure we didn't like give her any information or tell her anything about the area, just keeping her as sterile as possible. I told her, I said, I'm not really a believer in mediums that much. I've been a Christian for a long time. I don't really understand all that stuff, but I also understand the universe is a huge place, and I don't know everything. So I'm going to go into this experience with a clear and open mind, and I'm just going to go where the science and the evidence leads. And that's really what we did. A lot of stuff people would say were crazy, and a lot of things I wouldn't even tell you happened if it wasn't on camera, because you'd think I was crazy. What happened out there was just like we took our textbooks from school, being sitting there in 5th, 6th grade, and they're telling you how the world works and how these things work. And what we experienced was the exact opposite. We just took those textbooks, threw them out the window, and just started living our own experiences and seeing how things work out there, because it was different. It's just unlike anywhere in the entire world. Things work different out there. Time works different. Balls of light fly around you. We don't talk about the sounds that much. The sounds were every day. The sounds were every night. They were continuous. You would hear things like basketball games and car doors closing. You would hear crazy things all the time where it sounds weird, but you almost become like, I don't know if numb's the right word, but they almost become expected. Like you spend so much time in the supernatural out there that it almost becomes just like a part of the experience. And sometimes you don't even notice all the crazy stuff going on around you because you're just so accustomed to it. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but there's my best shot.
Well, let me
I'll second what Ash was saying, that the first couple of days we were out there, we were just blown away by the amount of noises. And by the end, we were barely acknowledging them, just because there were tree knocks all the time. Like by the end, we were actually editing around the tree knocks in the show, because we couldn't spend every single episode talking about the trees being banged on by something we couldn't see.
Well, Brian, with you helping get this show put together and going out there and being on location, did you have any idea of what the show would turn into when you first, based on what you the original concept and pitch, and to what you finally discovered when you were out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a 30,000 foot view, yeah, I did, just because I knew what the people involved were trying to accomplish. So, I think going in, we knew we were going to be doing a fair bit of exploring and looking for certain landmarks, many of which we never actually found. And that's another reason we want to go back out there. But we sort of had conversations behind the scenes with Tommy, one of the village elders, to sort of keep different experts on standby, so that if we ran into paranormal activity, we would have people we could call and sort of lean on for support. And likewise, I'd been in touch with Jeff saying, hey, we gotta figure out what's in the written record here, because whatever we come upon, we're going to want some context. So a lot of that stuff was sort of arranged as sort of a safety net for us. So if we ran into something we couldn't explain or couldn't understand, we had sort of the relevant experts on standby for us to contact and say, what do we do here? What do we do there? But on a more micro level, no, I mean, there's nothing that could have prepared me for the actual things that happened out there. I'm just grateful that the people that were willing to help us out were able to give us really important context and support throughout the process, so that we could come out safely and help tell this story.
We are coming up in the end. Irene, did you have any final questions?
No, I think you've covered them all.
In other words, I talk too much. Okay. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming on the show. And anybody who tuned in late, we are talking with the cast and crew of Discovery Plus's show, Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, with Ash Naderhoff, Brian Kniffel, and Jeff Davis. Gentlemen, this has been a blast, and really enjoyed speaking with all of you, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that hopefully we get into season 2 production very soon. Thank you again for coming on.
And please keep an eye out for it. It will be airing on Travel Channel on linear cable starting in June.
Yes, please watch it on Travel Channel. We have a Facebook group, Alaskan Killer Bigfoot Discovery Plus. We'll be changing it to Alaskan Killer Bigfoot Official soon. Cast comes on there all the time. Producers come on there. We answer questions, interact with people. So if you have any questions about the show, something we didn't cover on here, please come on to Facebook, Alaskan Killer Bigfoot Discovery Plus, and we'd be happy to chat with you on there one-on-one.
I'm on there too, as a poster.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, I see Mark on time, so please come over and say hi to us.
All right. Well, thank you guys again, and thank you everyone for listening to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Irene, where can everybody hear us?
Everywhere, people, everywhere.
Everyone, you have a great week, and be well. We'll talk with you soon. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.